Okay, folks, it is a couple minutes after 7 p.m. on January 23rd, 2019. We call to order this meeting of the Brattleboro Development Review Board. I'm sorry, I've got a cold. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand or something and I'll try to speak up. At every single meeting, we begin our meeting with opening remarks that explain the procedure of how this is going to work. So I'm going to go through that first. Then we'll have some brief business and we'll get to the applications. At the DRB, we hear applications for land development in the town of Brattleboro and appeals of zoning administrator decisions. Procedurally, the Development Review Board operates on the record. Broadly, that means we take a clear record of testimony from the applicant and any interested parties and then issue a written decision with our findings. Applicants and members of the public should be aware that because we're on the record, this is your opportunity and your only opportunity to comment on and provide evidence relating to an application. In the event our decision is appealed to the Environmental Court, the Environmental Court will not take or consider new evidence at its hearing. It'll look at the evidence from our hearing, the regulations and applicable law, and determine if the evidence supports the findings and decision of this board. Only interested people that participate in this proceeding may appeal a decision made by this board, so I strongly encourage all of you to speak up at this hearing. Because we're on the record, I'm going to ask that anybody who thinks there's even the slightest modicum of a possibility they're going to testify be sworn in. So if you expect to talk, I'd like you to raise your right hand. I'm going to swear you in. Do you hereby swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in the cause under consideration will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under the pains and penalties of perjury? I do. Let the record show that everybody in the room is now sworn in. Applicants require a majority vote of the full board to succeed. That means you need 4 votes for an application to be approved. We don't have a full board present tonight. As a matter of fact, we only have 5 people. But you still need 4 votes. What that means is we're going to give you a couple of options. Is everybody, how many people do we have available to review this?
At least 2 out of 3, and I haven't heard back from one.
Okay. So we can get 7 people to review the evidence presented here tonight. 2 of them will have to listen to the audio or watch the video that BCTV captures, which is not ideal if they're complicated drawings that you need to show us. But if you don't have things that are difficult to reproduce, that's a good solution. In the alternative, you can ask for continuance. Or in the alternative to that alternative, you can start your hearing, see how it's going. We'll try to give you something of a weather report. And if it looks like you can't get 4 votes with the 5 people here, you can ask for a continuance or seek to have the other 2 people hear it at that point rather than making a decision in advance. After taking testimony, the board will close the public hearing and we may vote on your application. The board will issue a written decision within 45 days of the close of the hearing. While we may vote on an application during this meeting, it's the written decision that controls the timeline for an appeal. It should be noted that the town of Brattleboro is a party that has an interest in land development applications. The town of Brattleboro has no special status before this board. Documents provided to the board by the town planning department, town attorney, or any other town representative are considered in exactly the same way as information from the applicants or any other interested parties that wish to comment on an application. So the first order of business is the approval of the minutes from our November 19th board meeting.
So move.
Move to approve.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Mr. Bannon, has our meeting been properly warned?
Yes, it has.
Disclosure of conflicts of interest in ex parte communications. I don't think this is a conflict of interest. Mr. Perrin, who's the principal of BUHS, was my teacher when I was in high school. I like him. I don't like him enough that it's going to affect the application. And I think at various times we've used Mr. Tyler to do some electrical work. We don't have any jobs going though, right? So in both cases, I don't think that those relationships prevent me from voting on any of the applications, but if somebody has an objection, you can raise it now. Anybody else?
I went to UHS.
You went to
Prior
BUHS.
Mr. Parents.
You feel
Thank you.
comfortable sitting?
Yeah, I'm familiar somewhat with the high school. I have in the past video recorded their BUHS board meetings.
Okay.
So I'm somewhat familiar, but I don't feel that affects my decision making.
Okay, anybody has any objections to Mr. Keel? Now is the time to state them. If you don't have any objections, that's fine. Anything else for conflicts of interest, ex parte communications? Okay. Oh, Dave, you're appointed to all applications. The first application is 2018-176, Brattleboro Union High School, request for a variance. You guys, is it just you speaking for the high school? Who's, okay, so whoever's gonna speak, if you could come to this table. The microphone doesn't amplify, but the people who watch this at home at BCTV, which is a surprisingly large audience, by the way, that's the only way that they can figure out what's going on. So if you could just tell us about the sign.
Sure. So for about the past year, the UHS Boosters Club has had a standing offer to purchase and install a large sign that would allow us to advertise sporting events, parent nights, other extracurricular activities. That sign was installed in August, and shortly after that, we were notified that we needed to request a variance for the sign. It is a sign that we use primarily to advertise sports, homecoming events, things that would help increase participation and attendance at public events. You know, we're part of the community. We're trying to use the sign to invite the community to come into our events, to enjoy our sports, enjoy our plays. We use it for parental outreach, so parents know when open houses are, they know when parent conferences are. So, you know, obviously we're not out there to make money on it. You know, we're very grateful that the boosters offered to buy it for us, and grateful that they installed it for us at no cost. And you know, the sign does scroll. It's a monochromatic sign. We can pick the color, but we can't change the color. It doesn't do any other imaging. And
You said monochromatic.
it is. We can pick the color, but we can't change the color. So we can pick green. Oddly enough, we can't use purple.
Okay,
It's not an option.
it's a real
so
shame.
It is. You know, there's, you know, with some teams we can't use red.
Right.
So, you know, we tend to keep it a nice greenish yellow color for contrast.
Does it move around?
It scrolls. It
No,
scrolls side
I-
to side.
I'm sorry, does the structure of the sign move around?
No, it's fixed to the wall.
Which wall is it fixed to?
As you're looking at the building, it's above the right. As you look at the entrance, there's a brick facade to the right, and it's on that brick facade. How high up is it?
15, 18 feet?
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm not. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You can
No,
continue.
I think I'm done. Do you have anything to
Just
add?
curious. Are there any other pictures? Or is it just the one? Okay. All right, I'm sorry. Either I didn't see the picture or, well, now I feel kind of silly
No, it's
asking
okay.
these questions. So, there are no other electronic signs attached to the building, right?
There are not.
At least that message in this way.
Right.
Okay. And how does the text move?
The text moves right to left.
Can you control that?
The speed?
Does it have to move?
It does not. It only moves if there's multiple messages. So like, for example, today there's one athletic event, so it's a static sign today. So the only time it scrolls is if we have more text than would fit in a single box. So homecoming week, it does.
Yeah. If rather than scrolling the message changed to every 15 minutes, would that destroy the purpose of the sign?
It would not. I don't know if the sign, I'd have to check the software. I don't know if the sign can do that. I'd have
Do-
to.
do you know, Brian?
I do not know that.
Okay. Is it illuminated after dark?
No, it is sometimes, but during the fall season, we had it shut off at, I think, 8 o'clock at night when games ended for the night.
So, when it scrolls, how fast does it scroll? I've seen it go, I drive by there probably 3 times a week.
Right.
And I've seen it go so fast, there's no way,
Right.
while I'm driving, I could read anything that's on that sign. Even when it's static, I sometimes have trouble if there's a lot of text.
Right, and that's why, we try to structure it so that we update it now daily for each game rather than putting the games for the week up. We now put it up, we'll put up Monday's games on Monday morning. If there's a game on Wednesday, we'll put up the Wednesday game. So we're trying to adjust the readability as well.
So, but when it does scroll, how fast does it scroll, do you know?
I think fairly quickly. I mean, I can't really, I don't.
Can you adjust that?
No, it scrolls at one speed.
Am I correct that there are no residences maybe within 500 feet of that sign?
There are not.
Perhaps substantially more than that?
Yeah, a lot more, because it faces the parking lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
you can't see it from any house.
And is the reason it's placed in the place that it is so that the student body that's entering and exiting the main entrance
Yes.
sees it primarily? It's not for the drivers?
Right.
Okay. And that's really the only place you can put it because you don't let people go in the other entrances
Right.
like they did in my day?
Exactly.
Yeah, I wonder why.
We've gotten smarter since you were there.
And there's really no other way to do this, to communicate with the students in this way, unless you actually made individual signs for each event.
Right.
And I'm guessing you don't have the resources available to make new signs for every event.
We do not.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, could I ask some general questions about electronic signs? These would be more directed perhaps to our zoning administrator. Walgreens, I believe, sits at the end of Fairground Road and
That was an exciting DRB here once upon a
well,
time.
I'd be curious, since I haven't been on the board that long, is Walgreens, using them specifically as an example because they're so close to the high school, are they in a different zoning district than the high school? Is it my understanding the high school's in sort of its own district, this institutional district, if that's what it's called?
They're in different zoning districts, but after Walgreens was permitted, the planning commission changed the regulations so electronic signs aren't allowed in southern Brattleboro.
My recollection is that I think that's actually the second Walgreens sign, the one we now see. And it was disallowed by the old regulations, resulting in the construction of that sort of odd scrolling sign, which the ordinances were then changed to ban. I don't know if it was that sign specifically, but I think that that was the subject of some controversy just before this provision, which is pretty harsh, was adopted. So I think there's probably some logical continuity between all of these things.
So one would assume that if Walgreens was a new construction here in 2019 at that same location, the only way they could have a sign like the one that exists would be requesting a variance and being granted that?
Or to have it change every 15 minutes.
Currently, you couldn't have that type of sign there.
The currently existing sign at Walgreens wouldn't conform.
Even if it changed every 15 minutes?
Yeah, the electronic ones are only allowed on Putney Road now in the service center district.
Oh, based on the district, okay.
So that was my second question. Stop and Go, and again, I'm using the name of the business because I can see it there. They now have an animated sign, and that is an allowed and conforming sign with the current zoning in Putney Road.
They've had some problems with the regulations recently, and they changed their operation to come into conformance with it. But that's a grandfathered non-conforming sign.
So that was to pre-existing the current electronic sign.
That is
So,
correct.
So our variance is not just as to the sign, but as to the district.
It would be the district and then a deviation from
Right.
the allowed operation.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I wanted to share my feelings. I don't want to diminish the enthusiasm that I think the Booster Club in the school has for communicating, which seems like a worthy goal. My personal feelings on electronic message signs is I tend to find that businesses that use them, I no longer want to give them my business because it shows me that they're probably charging too much because they have an electronic sign. So when I heard the school had an electronic sign, I said, geez, I film most of these BUHS board meetings, and God, are they tight with their budget. It never came up at a budget meeting. Subsequently, when I received my DRB packet, I said, oh, well, it was a donation. That's quite nice. I've taken a few pictures and video on my phone. I don't know whether that's germane for me to show other board members. I'm just curious to how many board members may have actually seen the sign.
I've seen it.
The picture's good enough for me. Now that I see it is in my packet,
The concerns I have, my daughter now goes to BAMS, so I wouldn't actually see this sign because I go around to BAMS, so I don't stay on Fairground Road. But we've gone, and so let's go check out the sign because I got my DRB packet. And what I noticed is the sign is not able to be read if you're driving which direction. You'd be headed, let's say you came off Canal Street and you're headed down to Cotton Mill Hill and you'd be traveling that direction. You would not be able to see the sign. My concern is, though I understand it's not directed at the traffic, is that my concern is that when you're headed, let's say, from Cotton Mill Hill to Canal Street and you're driving through Fairground, well, my concern is slightly different. My concern, and I have a photograph, is that when you go to look at that sign, you as a driver will be raising your eyes right where there are two separate crosswalks, one after another. And so, as much as I can sympathize and agree with the idea that an electronic sign could be a very useful communication tool, I'm prone to not allow this variance with the sign as it is. And again, it's the purview of this board. We grant variances, and I perhaps would vote yes on a variance that would that put the sign in a different location. I can see the need and I can see its usefulness, but I have real concerns about its location. And although it's not directly designed so that drivers need to look at it, I believe that it could cause a distraction in an area where I would not want there to be a distraction. And I hope that the applicant could understand where that concern comes from. Of course, I kind of muddied the waters by saying I just don't like electronic signs. But this one, that's an issue that I would like to raise at the board level so other board members could hear that. So.
Did you want to comment on that? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were kind of raising your hand.
And I guess, do you mind if I follow up? As a newer member to this board, I may not have the institutional memory. And so I don't know what the thought processes of people of this board would be to what would motivate us to grant an applicant a variance.
There needs to be a hardship.
Okay.
This needs to basically be the only way they can address the hardship
Okay.
created by the unique problems the property presents. And they need to show that
They haven't created the hardship.
they haven't created it, yep. And that the variance isn't gonna imperil public safety. I mean, that is actually, that's a consideration. Or otherwise, cause problems in the community.
I feel that this board, from my experience on it, is always willing to work with people who come to the town, to the planning office, with ideas. And we generally try and work with them. And I think that obviously this is a situation where it's sort of after the fact. Because I do wonder if there could have been some possibilities of locating that sign in a different manner, that would have made it, perhaps, wouldn't bring up some of the concerns that I have. And so I'm sort of putting that out there to my fellow board members, and our zoning administrator, I'm sure, has worked with many applicants over the years in terms of how one would address things ahead of the time. So I find that we're in an interesting situation because it's sort of already happened. And again, I'll
I don't
defer to
think
someone
I-
else's
Yeah, I don't
experience.
think we've ever granted a variance, have we?
We came close on the Arch Street property, but then they withdrew their application.
That's right.
It's pretty rare, though, that we get requests.
The only time you guys granted a variance was, I think, maybe about 10 years ago. It was for the co-op, and it was because they had ordered a sign based on information I gave them that was incorrect. So,
That was prior to my tenure.
yeah.
Was that similar to the situation with Auto Mall where there was some leeway to apply the prior ordinance, though? Or was it a real variance?
It was a real variance, and it was specific to me giving them incorrect information and them
Okay.
acting on that incorrect information.
Which is arguably not a basis for a variance in my view, but
Could we share this with the applicant? This is sort of the criteria for a variance.
Look,
Um,
yeah, I think
They have that, they've had that?
I think so, yeah. They addressed in their application.
Okay. Again, this chart is very useful for me to understand, you know, what criteria we need to meet.
Before we talk about this one issue, I just want to ask if other board members have stuff they want the applicant to address, and then I want to give the applicant a chance to respond, not just to you, but if there are other concerns. And if there are no more, that's fine too.
I have just one question. How long has the sign been up?
End of August.
You're all set? Mike?
I'm all set.
Okay. So, you obviously are in charge of student safety among your many responsibilities. Can you talk to us a little bit about the relationship between the signs, the drivers, the walkers?
Sure.
I assume that most of the student drivers are diverting into either entrance of the parking lot before they come into range, right?
Right, most student drivers use the entrance closest to Canal Street. So they actually park before they see the sign. They come in that first end, they come down Fairground Road and they take the left
Right.
into the first parking spots.
And if they're coming from South Main, they would turn in before
would
they
turn
get
in
into
before
the
they
place
can-
where you can read the sign, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we talked about where to site the sign, we considered a lot of options. We looked at options, putting it in the front yard and running electrical lines out to it underground. We talked about tapping into the existing sign that's there now. And we actually chose not to do that for that very reason, because we didn't want to have people parking in front of the school, looking at it, or parking and trying to see it. So we had made that conscious decision to locate it where it was to avoid that. And a couple other places we looked at is we looked at putting it along Tenney Field, along the baseball field. And again, we really didn't want to have it that far away from the school because it wasn't really part of the school. So we wanted it so people walking into the school could see it. And we were really thinking about foot traffic, because as you come into the building, you always have to look, you're always coming in that way and walking up those steps. The sign is right there. It's really done with the eye for a pedestrian. And I've actually approached the school from that side, and I haven't had the issue. I've had the issue where I've looked and not been able to really read it, and I've thought to myself, boy, we have to slow that scroll down. That's why we prefer the fixed sign as well. So when we thought about where to put it, that was a consideration. And what we really wanted to target is we wanted to target students who were coming into school and their parents who would come to visit and come to an event. Like, so maybe they're coming to a lacrosse game, or they're coming to a basketball game, but they're also seeing that the winter musical's coming up in a week. So they get a chance to say, oh, okay, I'm going to come back to the school and see that event as well. Anything to add?
Can it be put inside any place?
It could be. I mean, you'd lose the visibility. I mean, put it on an interior wall. But for people that are coming to an outdoor event like a football game or a soccer game, they're not going to see it because they're not going to come inside the building.
come to, I'm trying to remember, if you go into the gym, you have to walk around and go in the other door. At least that's the way
Yes.
I've gone in. Is there any way it can be put on that side near the football field and near the entrance to the gym?
Two concerns. One is that you lose 800 students walking in every day, seeing it. The other concern, and I don't, this is just me off the top of my head, I don't know that the Historical Society will want us to affix anything to that facade in the front. Because that's a pretty distinctive archway where you come in. And again, I can't speak to that now, but I'd be reticent to put anything on that facing.
Is that wall the theater wall? Is it the outside wall of the theater?
The corridor going into it.
Right.
So, I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
The corridor going into the theater.
Does the sign sometimes advertise events that are within the theater?
They do. Well, we haven't had any, but they would.
That's one of the functions?
The winter concert they advertised.
Okay. What are the zoning, are there limitations as to the marquee? Does it have to be in the downtown district? Can it be in any district?
I think there are limitations on whether it's polychromatic according to district, but otherwise it's function.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And given that this isn't actually directed at the public, you might also want to examine whether it falls under wayfaring, informational signage, or whether it's actually a sign at all.
I don't follow you, Brian. I'm sorry.
So if it's directed at people entering in the school community itself instead of towards the general public, you should consider whether it actually fits the definition of a sign.
Oh, as if it's an interior property element.
Yeah. Or if it's functioning more as wayfinding or informational signage.
Would that come under a different section in this booklet?
It's all under 319.
Oh, it's all in the same.
I want to think about that for a second. I just want to open it up. Is anybody here from the public to speak about this application? Okay, so I'm just going to note that there's no members of the public who came to speak. And I'm not texting my friends. I'm looking up the relevant provision of the zoning ordinance.
Would you like to see a photo of the school so you can see the larger context? I mean, is this something I can share at Brian, at a hearing like this, sharing a photo?
I just have to make a notation of what exactly you're sharing.
Sure.
So just describe what you're sharing and
This is, and I'll be happy to show the applicant. This was a photo taken relatively recently. It's digital, it can be zoomed in. And I would be standing sort of with Tenny Field to my back. So I'd be sort of looking at the new entrance. I call it the new entrance because I grew up with the old entrance. And the parking lot of the student parking lot would be on the right hand of this photograph. And again, you can zoom that if you want.
Can you take a screenshot of this and send it to Brian too?
Can I text it to you? It's the easiest.
As long as this gets to Brian so we can put it in the record.
Okay.
Which,
And again, that picture was taken to the location because, may I show the applicants, Mr.
Oh,
Chair?
hold on. I should have shown my.
Just because it has the crosswalks in it. And again, I'll say publicly, again, I can understand the utility of such a sign. I just, I have questions about, again, the history of this board issuing variances. You've seen this view.
Yeah.
You know.
So you did say it has, if you're advertising multiple events, you can't do it so that it only changes every 15 minutes.
I don't think so. I guess I'd want to dive back into the software.
Are you talking, okay,
I couldn't find a section.
now he's talking about
Oh, instructional.
362, section 11.
What's the page number?
319,
Yeah.
it's on page 3-62. At the top.
Is the sign legible from off the property?
I've never looked. I mean, I'm thinking about if you're standing on the far edge of a student parking lot, to my old eyes, it wouldn't be.
Well, if you look
Would
at
we
the picture
consider,
that we just
would
sent
we
there.
consider the road would be off the property?
The road is public, right?
My understanding is the school would own its property, and the student parking lot is presumably the school's property as well.
Right.
But the road is the sort of kicker.
It's town.
Is it one big parcel?
It is.
It's one PUD, and as somebody who walks through there in both directions on a frequent basis, it's not visible.
It's not visible from the road,
It's not visible from off the property.
or it's not legible, I should say.
For me, it's not legible from the
Okay.
road at all, but that's not saying much.
So-
You're talking about walking on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
So, but is the road considered part of the property, or is it public?
it's a public road, but you can't see the sign from outside the boundaries of the PUD itself.
So you're saying that this
That's
is a
true, you
PUD
can-
that has the road go through it? Okay. Which makes it sort of unique. Perhaps not that unique.
You'd be surprised. Well, this is quite a sticky wicket. I think it might be appropriate to have a deliberative session, but I don't want to do that before the applicant has their chance to say anything else you want to say.
I'm okay.
I think I'm fine. It's
Yeah.
I think this sign is no different than any other digital signs you have anywhere as far as your sidewalks go, or somebody looking at a sign and potentially having an incident. It's, I think once you notice a sign, after 2 or 3 times, when you're driving, you don't look at it anymore,
Mhm.
for me. And as a parent who goes to the school, and the sign's been on since August, and I cross that crosswalk going to games at night, I've never had an issue. And I can't read it from the parking lot, but that's part of my old eyes too. But
So I'm going to ask for a motion to go to deliberative session. This is really just to try to save everybody some pain, because I want to parse a couple of different ordinances. I have gone on the record many times saying I'm not a great fan of our side ordinances. We try to apply them as appropriately as we can, but sometimes multiple ordinances create one of those diagrams.
Sure.
What is it? A Venn diagram?
Venn diagram.
Thank you. A Venn diagram, and we've got to sort out where the thing belongs. So can I have a motion for
So moved.
motion?
Second.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, it is 5 to 8. We're calling back to order this meeting of the Development Review Board. During the deliberative session, we learned sort of accidentally that one member of the board had received an ex parte communication that we didn't disclose prior to this. He didn't actually say what that communication was. That's Mr. Keel. Nor did we inquire, but you feel that this communication is not prejudice you?
I had a citizen approach me, and that person stated their opinion about, the conversation was, you're on the DRB, this is my opinion.
feel that you can be fair and just.
I wanted to say that the opinions that I expressed here in public have been my own and not those of that citizen.
But you feel you can give the applicant a fair shake. That's the important part.
I do.
Okay.
I do. And again, the concerns that I expressed were my own, not the opinion that was shared with me. And I was told in the future that if a person approaches me about an upcoming event, I would direct them to send an email or a letter to our zoning administrator so that that person's opinion could then become part of the public record. And that's the correct approach?
Yes, this
Okay.
was your first ex parte communication. I don't know why we assume that everybody will know Latin and exactly what that means, but we don't have a training package, so.
I was under the
just-
impression it was with the applicant or a
I
butter.
totally understand, but we just wanted to clear that up, now that we're back on the record. We had a deliberative session and discussed the appropriate provisions, and I think it's fair to say, with one dissenting vote, that it's the view of the board that the sign here is an instructional sign. It's communicating information to the people using this campus that's not legible from off the premises. We believe the premises is the campus, even though there is the road that goes through it. And pursuant to Ordinance 361, I'm sorry. Pursuant to Ordinance 319G11, pardon me. Instructional and wayfinding signs that will not be legible from off the premises will be allowed without limitation and will not be counted when determining the total number and area of signs allowed on site. Accordingly, in just a moment, I'll be asking for a motion to approve the application. It's not going to be to allow a sign. It is going to be a motion to designate this an instructional and wayfinding sign, which means that you don't actually need to proceed down the road of variance. So we're denying your request for a variance while simultaneously finding that the sign is appropriate under different guidelines within the sign ordinances. However, I also want to direct the applicant's attention to a couple of things. One is that if one were to really turn this sign up and make it very bright and distracting perhaps, it would probably become legible from off the premises.
Sure.
As soon as that happens, it's no longer an instructional wayfinding sign that is not legible from off the premises. It would become a sign subject to all of the other provisions of the sign ordinance. And I want to be candid with you. It's really difficult to get a variance. It's really, really difficult. You essentially have to be able to show that your property will not be usable unless you get it. You would have to say, we can't educate these kids unless we have this sign.
Sure.
And this is certainly nothing against this application or the sign, which seems to be, you know, a beneficent sort of sign. I want you to understand that if this becomes subject to the sign ordinance, that variance road is a very tough road to hoe. I also want to specifically call your attention to Section 319C, which prohibits specifically signs that signs that limit driver sight distance, that could be confused with highway signs, or that unduly distract drivers' attention or otherwise impair public safety. So if you find yourself back in sign world, it's not going to be a good thing. So we can't put anything in the permit telling you to keep your sign muted. We can't tell you to keep it down. However, if you go too far the other way, it's probably going to result in the sign being prohibited. So that said, can I have a motion to find as a matter of law that the sign, which is the subject of application 2018-176, is an instructional and wayfinding sign, and to deny the application on the basis that it is moot because such sign is not a sign that needs a variance in order to be displayed by the applicant.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, any further discussion? Questions about this? Is it a little complicated procedurally? Okay. Brian, are there any procedural issues I'm missing there? I think I'm doing it right. Denying the application but making the finding?
Specifically denying the variance application, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, this is kind of a funny situation for you. All those in favor of denying the application but simultaneously making the finding of fact that it's an instructional and wayfinding sign, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I was hoping to choose to abstain.
Oh, okay.
Is that my prerogative?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, no opposition, any abstentions?
I am the abstention.
Okay. So you need 4 votes. You have 4 votes. It's 4-0-1. Your application is strangely denied, but you have a finding of fact now on the record that as long as it's not appealed and overturned, will enable you to keep that sign. The appeal, so we have to get this decision out within 45 days. We usually turn it around faster than that. And then the interested people, even though they weren't here tonight, do have the option to appeal on legal grounds.
Sure.
And Brian can answer questions about that.
Great.
So your application is denied. Have a nice night.
Thanks.
Unusually friendly denial. Thank you. The next application is, gosh, I'm sorry. Application 2018-197, Integrated Solar for Rollerdrome LLC. Sir, if you could just state your name for the record and tell us a little bit about the project.
My name is Andy Kay. I'm with Integrated Solar. I represent Rollerdrome LLC as their agent. This is an appeal of a decision by the zoning administrator. I have a voice that comes and goes, so I
No problem.
apologize for that ahead of time.
Don't worry about
Sometimes it cooperates, sometimes it doesn't.
We'll ask you to repeat anything we can't understand, but I'm following along just fine.
And so I have submitted a document titled Reasons for Appeal. You have that.
We did receive that,
Okay.
and I just want to be candid for you. I didn't see it in my email today, so I read it when I got here tonight. It's a detailed document and quite helpful. I may have some questions about it, though, that reflect my only having a chance to read it once.
And so maybe I can breeze through a few of those points and try not to bore you with all the gory details.
Absolutely, sure.
So we presented many different arguments here as to why this project didn't meet the test for substantial improvement. Fair market value is one of those factors. In this case, we think fair market value, it's a determination that the assessed value of the building is $280,000. 50% of that number is $140,000. And so that's the threshold that we need to be under in order not to meet the definition of substantial improvement. These solar projects are done with benefit of tax benefits, state tax credits, federal tax credits, depreciation, and other benefits. The gross cost of the project is not reflective of what it really costs the owner as a result. So in this case, Rollerdrome invested about $154,000 in a 2-phase project. Their net cost, if you back out the state and federal tax credits, is about $96,000. So that's less than the threshold of 140. We can look to the town assessed value process as an indicator of fair market value. There aren't too many projects in town that have been solar projects that have been assessed by the assessor's office. And that's because there's an exemption for projects of 50 kW and smaller don't receive an assessment. One project that has been valued is the Winstanley project at Exit 3. And so I've included in the package a Scandia Laboratories valuation model that the assessor's department used for that project. And that's an online spreadsheet that they go into, put the various factors of the project in and come up with a valuation. And then they multiply that by a 70% factor and they arrive at their assessed value. When I do that same thing for these two phases, I arrive at a value of $55,400. From an assessment standpoint, in this case, as I stated, the value, however, is zero because it's a project that's under that 50 kW exemption. And so I would state to you that the fair market value of this project, as it stood when it was completed, was somewhere between that value of zero, which would be too low, and the 96,800. And probably the best indicator of value is that Scandia Laboratories model, the 55,400. There are some other things that point to this question of value. The treatment of the depreciable basis in a project like this by the IRS is determined by the gross project cost minus 50% of the federal tax credit. And that value amounts to 131,000. So that depreciable basis number, once again, is less than the $140,000 threshold. Ryan, in his presentation to the board, mentioned a FEMA document, P758. That's a desk reference that provides some guidance of what costs are includable in the determination of substantial improvement or substantial depletion, and what costs are not. With this project, this was a turnkey project that Integrated Solar did on behalf of Rollerdrome. So Integrated Solar was paid a development fee for doing that turnkey project. That was in the amount of $20,114. So if that development cost was determined to be a non-includable cost, then the net cost of the project on that basis would be $134,096. So once again, that would be less than the 140 number. These solar projects are, some solar projects are fixtures in building improvements. If I put a system on my house, it's clearly improving my house. And my benefit in that building. In this case, this project is put on top of a warehouse that Rollerdrome LLC owns. But all of that power that's generated goes directly to the grid. And that energy is sold to purchasers of net metering credits offsite. And so the solar energy benefit does not go to the building or does not go to the occupants of the building, which happens to be my company, Integrated Solar. And so in this case, this property would be interpreted as personal property, not a fixture. It's affixed to the building. But its intended purpose is for the export of power, for the sale of power elsewhere. If Rollerdrome LLC sold the building, Rollerdrome LLC would retain a lease of that roof space and that area of the building where the equipment resides. And so under that lease, it would be treated as personal property. That kind of flies in the face of the way towns assess solar property. They tend to assess it as a building improvement. But that's not necessarily consistent with, from an accounting standpoint of how you would treat that. A few other points. Regulation 251A, the flood hazard overlay zoning district, has a stated purpose in 251A to avoid and minimize the loss of life and property, the disruption of commerce, the impairment of tax base, and the extraordinary public expenditures and demands on public services that result from flooding. To ensure that land development within the flood hazard areas is responsible, safe, and does not reduce the ability of the floodplain to perform its natural function to store and transport floodwaters, and to manage flood hazard areas in accordance with the town's hazard mitigation plan, state statute, and federal regulations, so that the town of Brattleboro, its residences and businesses will be eligible for federal flood insurance, federal disaster recovery funds, and hazardous mitigation funds. In this case, the personal property that was put on the roof and the equipment that's attached in the corner of the building warehouse is safe from harm itself and has done nothing to change the pre-existing conditions of the building relative to flood hazard exposure.
Can I ask a real quick question?
Yep.
When was the value of the building assessed by the town?
You know off the top of your head.
It was done at the last assessment and hasn't been revised.
That's
and
right.
A few years ago?
Yeah.
The calculation of substantial improvement doesn't actually reflect the current common level of assessment adjustment. But
What do you mean?
from year to year, they do a common level of assessment to make sure the assessment is accurately reflects market values.
Yeah.
So anything that hasn't been done, but anything in the range of 40 to 60% comes before the board for a determination whether it's actually substantially improved.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. At the time this project was done, it received a certificate of public good from the Public Service Board. It received state electric and building permits, and all of the state inspections were completed when each of the phases was done. We did not believe there was a permit necessary for the town of Brattleboro until we were noticed of Brian's determination, or rather of Brian's inquiry about the status of it. This building, given its history, when it was originally built, it was not built to the elevation that it was permitted for, which was 236 feet. At that time, the base flood elevation was 235.5. Later on, it was built in 1988. By 1998, it received a variance related to that matter. And in the intervening years, the federal government has come back through and they've resurveyed the base flood elevation, and it's dropped. So it's dropped to 232 feet. And now the building is at 232.5. So technically the building is, the first floor is out of base flood elevation by 6 inches. But it doesn't meet the town's floodplain ordinance requirement of being out of it by a foot, so we're off by 6 inches. However, it's much better than it was back when the base flood elevation was higher. So in summary, I'm asking the board in this case rule that the solar project did not meet the definition of substantial improvement, and that no permit was required in this case.
Do you know if you've improved the building in any other ways since the last appraisal or assessment?
There were offices built in 2008, we built out approximately maybe 500 square feet of the warehouse was converted to office from warehouse space.
I'm just checking the grand list to see when your assessment was.
I believe it was 2010.
Oh, so you think it's after this?
Yeah.
What year did you say?
I believe it was assessed in 2010.
Yeah, so the assessment year was April 1, 2009. 2010
And that was
updated, and then its most recent was 2012.
Were those valuations all the same?
So the building valuation in 09 was 238,400. In 10 it was 287,760, and in 12 it was 284,10.
Members of the board have questions?
James, I want to make a presentation on some
Oh,
information when you
I'm
have
sorry.
an opportunity.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I think there's a little confusion about assessed value and the assessed value of the arrays compared to determining the actual cost of improvement. So when we do a substantial improvement calculation, we're looking at the assessed value of the structure prior to the improvement. But we're not looking at the assessed value of the improvement. We're looking at the actual cost of improvement, which includes materials, labor, and any items necessary, which includes management costs and permitting costs, I think. I'd have to look that up to actually confirm exactly what components are included. So one possibility the board could look at is if we looked at a detailed breakdown of the budget of this project, we could go through the FEMA guidance and see if there's anything that might be excluded and reduce the cost of improvements that must be considered in the calculation.
Is that information available?
It is, yep. I don't have it with me tonight.
No, I
but
understand, but it exists.
It would be.
Okay.
So I think that would be a valuable refinement and make sure that we have that part of the equation correct. The second is, as I mentioned, this doesn't reflect the common level of assessment from this year.
Right.
So that might impact the value of the building itself, and again, it shouldn't have much more than a percentage, but again, that might be important, and we should redo that calculation reflecting that. Just a quick note on permit requirements. Almost any improvement on a building that's in a special flood hazard area requires a permit. And that could be something as trivial as actually painting the exterior. So, call our office and make sure you get in writing that you don't require a permit. Otherwise, assume that you do require one. We do have an informational campaign, but it has been directed at building owners and not business owners. And I think in this case, this was a disservice and went a long way to creating this problem. And I'll try and refine our outreach programs so we actually get businesses that are in the flood hazard areas as well in future. Doesn't really help much now, but going forward, I think people deserve that, you deserve that, and we don't want to trap people in bad situations. Last possibility is this array has been developed so that all its components are elevated above base flood elevation. It is in fact safe from flooding, flotation, lateral movement. So I think it is very much a conforming structure.
You're
If it
saying
were to
like an
be-
independent structure?
Pardon me?
I said an independent structure?
That's why I'm wondering. I'm wondering if this could be treated as a building addition, because you can have additions to a pre-firm building. So it would be a question of, does it have independent structural support? Is it relying on the structural support of the existing building? So I think that's something where we really need some guidance directly from FEMA itself, to see if this can be treated as something that's separate from the building. I think these are some things we could gather some more information and bring this back before the board. The board can make its determinations, and, if this is held up, what has to happen is there has to be some approach to dry flood proofing the building, which
Right.
is achievable, but we don't want to force anybody into that until we firmly determine that.
What was that very last thing you said?
Pardon me?
What was that very last thing you said?
So if the board does uphold this, what would happen next is that you'd have to come back with a floodproofing plan for the building. So that would be a dry floodproofing plan,
A dry
floodproofing. So that,
flood proofing.
right, so that
Sorry,
means
that
that
was what I didn't
you
hear.
put barriers across the
Okay.
doors, you waterproof the walls, you have pumps inside, sump pump, so forth, as opposed to elevating a building.
Yeah, I was curious about this, this document from SVE Associates, and just how to read that. It seemed to be, from a layman's point of view, is saying that assuming a flood, they felt that the building would be secure from it. Is that how to read this document?
That it
Yeah.
wouldn't fall down.
Yes,
How
that
I
it wouldn't
read.
fall down or float away.
That's true.
And
but
is that in layman's term what this
it-
Yes.
It is, but it's only partially germane because our real question is it in the map that the federal people create? And if it's in the zone on the FEMA map,
They have to have it.
there are these rules regarding substantial improvement, and that makes the germane question, is this a substantial improvement?
Yeah, I believe that's the main question that has to be determined.
Right.
So one question is whether the array is structurally independent from the building itself.
Yeah, I would say that that's not the case. I mean, it's lagged into the building trusses, so it's not an independent frame, freestanding, or any such thing.
It doesn't have legs that go down beside the building.
That's correct.
The roof comes down, the array comes down with it.
That's right.
Do you have any opinion that the value of your house, not your house, I'm sorry, your property may be greater than 280?
Well, I haven't researched Rollerdrome's purchase history. I know they paid $365 for the property.
Well, let me just explain something to you. Generally, when you want to give an opinion on value, you need an expert like an appraiser. However, people who own houses are permitted to give opinion testimony. I keep saying houses, but you know what I mean, property. They're permitted to give their opinion, which is not normal. Usually witnesses are just supposed to testify as to the facts that they know. But property owners can give their opinion as to property value. Of course, the caveat to that is you've got to be able to back it up in some measure. That doesn't mean you have to have a document that says, yeah, this is correct. But what you're talking about, for instance, the price of the building when it was purchased, or your belief that it has some marketability in excess of the assessed value, if you follow me. Maybe it's unique, maybe there would be a buyer that really wants this type of building or wants this type of thing in this location. Those are all perfectly viable grounds to suggest that the value is higher. Your argument that about the costs, however, the way I read it, I don't think we can take off things like tax credits from the cost. However, I think Mr. Bannon is right that the cost breakdown would be very useful because there may be costs there that are not considered part of the improvement. And in my view, and is any member of the public here to speak to this application? I'm sorry. Okay. Just let the record show that nobody in the public said that they would. In my view, a little more information as to whether the true value of the building, the number on the bottom of the equation, could be bigger, or whether there are items that should have been excluded because you're pretty close. Without doing that investigation, it seems to me imprudent to try to make a decision today. The materials you've submitted have been extremely helpful. However, to me, those are the ones that are harmonic with the question the law seeks to have us answer. Does everybody follow what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say in the most complicated way.
And how about the fair market value of the improvement relative to the definition of cost?
I don't have the definition of cost in front of me. We had this come up in another project that was not like this at all. It was property that had actually been flooded, and they needed to renovate it after it had been damaged. So I'm going from memory here without any authority in front of me, and I don't like to do that. But I don't think you're supposed to consider interpretation of cost beyond what they say should be included and should not be included. You follow me?
I mean, if you spend $100 for something that's going to be worth $50 when it's in place, and the difference is tax benefits, then the value in place is $50.
I think your argument is rational, but I don't think that that's what the rules say.
It's not cost.
Yeah.
I don't think it's cost.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think it's a reasonable grounds for somebody to take a look at the rule, but that's not our job, and we can't do it on an ad hoc basis. But you're so close. I really want to know what this information suggests, because I mean, there's a lot of arguments in here. It's just that if it were that some of the items from the budget could be removed, and you get the numerator down, and if it were true that your opinion of the value was credibly slightly more than 280, in my view, that's a very clean way to solve this problem. And I think that we should do the necessary work to figure out if the clean way exists before we engage in a more complicated, frankly, challenging, I think, both for us in terms of the interpretive work we'd have to do, and also for you, because none of the arguments for your application would be as good as just some of this work isn't included in the FEMA definition, and the value's higher, and the fraction's less than 50%. That's clean. We don't have much to say about that, particularly where there's not some interested person who comes in and says, no, the value here is 250. Because you're the only guy, the applicant, who's come here to speak. You are putting all the evidence we consider into the record. Mm-hmm. And if you don't give us a reason to consider you the lack of credibility, you're giving testimony under oath as to your building's value. We'll consider that.
To be clear, the State Rivers Program is an interested party who has made comment on this application.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have that here in this packet?
There's an email from John Broker Campbell.
Yeah.
Which one was those?
I didn't realize that this was a comment that was designed for our consideration. I thought you were providing this as information.
Oh,
This is it's from John Broker Campbell.
Yeah.
and it's an email that speaks to the question of whether it's treated as personal property. And FEMA Region 1 person offered that, in fact, it's taken as a building utility.
Right.
What is the SI calculation? What is the SI?
Substantial improvement.
I see.
Whether it's over 50%.
I mean, that's interesting because it's clearly not a building utility.
Under their regulation, it clearly is, according to the gentleman at FEMA Region 1.
It's a building utility that serves no utility to the building.
Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time agonizing over a question that, in my view, is not the right one that we need to answer. And my suggestion is that we continue this for 1 month. What's the format you have your budget on for the improvements?
Oh, I can do
Spreadsheet-
it in
spreadsheet or
QuickBooks
something?
or spreadsheet.
Can you give us a spreadsheet? I just want to make sure it's something that everybody's reasonably familiar with. Brian, would it be possible for you to give us the regulations as to what costs should and should not be included?
I could go through a spreadsheet and
That would be really
classify
helpful.
that according to what the desk reference says and give the page reference.
That would be really, really helpful.
Okay, great.
And I think it would be prudent and wise for you to consider what your view of the property value is and what you can tell us to explain why you think that. And I want to be clear. I want to be clear on two things. The real value of a property is not always its assessed value, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I am not an agent for the Brattleboro tax, the listing office, and I will not. I don't think anybody here is going to be reporting this. But it's important information for us to consider.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that you consider having this resolved in 2 meetings. In the next meeting, we actually consider the cost of improvement, and if that doesn't get the ratio to where it needs to be for your appeal to be successful, then you should consider whether you want to either offer your own opinion of the assessed value of the structure or have a professional appraisal done, which is the most defensible estimate.
So,
But there's,
So why don't you and I work together on that cost? I'll provide it to you. If you can give me some feedback on how you're viewing it, then hopefully you and I will be on the same page.
what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask for a motion to continue this for 1 month with the understanding that if you want to continue it for another month based on your discussions with Mr. Bannon, you ask us and we'll consider it. We can email and agree to continue the application. And even though we'll have the written material, we can knock it back another month if you want to present further evidence. That addresses your concern, right?
that is correct. I don't think it's necessary to have the additional expense of an appraisal if we still have the question of
Sure.
cost open.
Sure. So, motion to continue application 2018 197.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
We need the date of the next meeting. It's in the calendar down.
The third Monday in February, unless it's a holiday, in which case it's
there
the
it
Maybe the
Wednesday.
18th, February 18th.
It is a,
Is that
Oh, it's
that's
President's Day?
isn't it?
President's
Will we
Day.
make it the 20th then?
It's probably May. It's probably May 20th. It has to be posted.
February 20th.
Listen, if you want us to consider your application, you've got to figure out when the meeting is occasionally because we don't always know.
I think
But
it's February 20th.
Yes.
this strikes me as presenting a road to resolution of this that is comports with the law and is not terribly onerous for anybody.
All right, very good, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, did I vote? Did I
We
take
haven't
vote?
voted
yet.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, sir.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, so, pretty big deal here. Application 2019-1. Wow.
Number 1.
Gabriel, is it Hulme?
Hume, yes.
Hulme. Just let me get organized here for a second, and could you just tell us about your project and tell us who you're...
This is Scott Mathis,
Identify
my
everybody.
business partner. We own and operate Mathis Hume Builders. We have a building out on Marlborough Road, just before the Chelsea Royal Diner. And
Big red one?
No, it's on the left-hand side if you're heading out of
Oh,
town.
the old woodworking.
Yes.
Nat,
Nat Waring.
Nat Waring,
Yeah, we
yeah.
bought that.
And the blacksmithers before
And,
that.
and before that, the blacksmith.
Before that, the blacksmith,
And,
yep.
We
but
like
it's-
to do
So
this.
it's now, continues to be a wood shop, but we are, our main line of work is construction. And so we have discovered that we can't really operate a wood shop and store all of our construction equipment in that building. So we're looking to build a barn behind the wood shop that we can store expensive scaffolding and ladders and planks and tools and equipment. The problem is we have a narrow lot that's 55 feet wide, and
Really?
yep,
Wow.
given the setback regulations for the town of Brattleboro of 20 feet, that would allow us to build a 10-foot wide building,
Right.
which is pointless. So we've applied for a variance to allow for the setback,
So no, you don't want a variance.
or excuse me,
Dimensional waiver.
a dimensional waiver.
Dimensional waiver.
Yeah.
Trust me on that.
To allow us, I think, an extra, it would be 15 feet on either side rather than the 20, which would allow us to build a technically 25-foot building, but we want to build a 24-foot building by 24 feet, and that's why we're here today.
Okay. What's it gonna look like?
What's it gonna look like? That's a. We're planning on doing just a single slope, single story, sort of a barn.
I saw the drawing. I was kind of
Yeah.
curious about the siding. Is like corrugated steel. What's
Actually, I think the siding was just gonna be wood sheathing, if I recall.
vertical?
Yes.
It says vertical board siding, but
Yeah.
I wasn't exactly sure what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be painted or stained or natural color?
Natural wood.
Just natural wood.
To match
yeah.
the building in front
Yeah.
of it?
Exactly. Yep.
Could I ask a couple questions? How I'm referring to your illustration here.
Mm-hmm.
How,
That's the site map,
Yep.
sort of, site
yeah,
drawing?
well, you definitely say it's a very thin, it's
Yeah,
a narrow.
long and narrow.
Long and narrow,
yeah.
yeah.
And then, for us to read this map, about how far from the back of the existing building do you plan to build the barn?
It's about 15 feet,
Yeah, maybe even 20 feet.
maybe even 20. There's a, we have
Between the two
to,
buildings you're asking?
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I guess this question is directed to Brian.
20 feet at least.
The rear of this proposed barn does not create any issues with the stream and that buffer?
No, it's outside the riparian buffer.
Okay, so if the dimensional variance has nothing to do with any stream buffers or at all?
That is
To be clear
correct.
on that, what they're asking for is nothing to do with the stream. It would, even if they put a 10 by 10, if they put a 10 by 10 barn, they wouldn't even have to come here, right?
Correct.
It's the,
Correct.
it's the,
Is there gonna be any parking there?
No. No, we
If
have
there's no
parking.
parking, do they get out of the electric vehicle charging? Even if they have electrical service, because we'll have power, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There's already a parking area there that's just going to continue.
Okay.
I wanted to also ask about the photo. You did put one of these. Yeah. So I guess this is a photo looking. Is that called Westgate Drive?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of photo taken of. I'll hold that up if the camera wants to see it. You've seen this one. I think you submitted it.
No, I did not.
Okay. It's just I guess a
Oh, I
Google,
see, that's the.
it's just the
Google Earth view.
Right.
Yeah.
Good
It
old
doesn't
Google.
really, but my understanding is that you essentially share this entrance and driveway with these properties next door.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I'm presuming what your hopes would be is to some sort of extend something so that trucks could be brought up to the barn to unload or load?
It's already gravelled.
Oh, it's already gravel
Yeah,
area? Okay. So we don't have any concerns about the driveways and as far under this proposal, right?
So the continuing access is there. The only concern is that it's a strange site because it actually has 3 front yards. which means it's completely unbuildable because the setbacks cover the entire parcel. The regulations only contemplate parcels that have 2 front yards, so as you should make a finding that in effect the west gate is a side yard setback.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me how a parcel like this could be identified as having 3 front yards? I just can't quite understand that.
Sure, it has a front yard along Marlborough Road. It has a front yard along Westgate Drive,
Yeah.
and then it has a front yard along the private driveway that accesses its parking area.
You don't see that as a more applicable side yard?
The one with the private drive, it has the function of actually having the entrance to the property on it, so there's not even pedestrian access off of Westgate. But
Is there any path or trail along the brook that people walk along?
No.
What are you going to do about landscaping?
Plant a row of trees along the Westgate side of the building. We were, it was suggested we plant some bushes rather than trees that will mature to full height, because we actually have solar panels on our existing building providing us with power for our building. We wouldn't want to block or impede those in any way, shape, or form, so.
What are you going to do with your snow?
As of now, the plow man just directly pushes all of the snow parallel with the building site all the way back towards the end of the property, and we'll continue to just do the same thing.
The barn won't be in the way?
No.
do you plow it into the brook, or?
No, there's that riparian area you were talking about, and that whole area is very brushy. There's a lot of sumac there. Our plow guy basically stops right there at that spot. And so, we get a large pile of snow there in a good winter, but.
So we'll shovel out the front door before the plowman comes, and he'll pick all that up and just push it beyond the building.
Yeah.
I had a question that came to mind looking at, first of all, I just think it's hilarious that you think if you had 3 front yards that would be a positive, but in their case, it seems to be a negative. And their calculation, again, the parcel's only 55 feet wide. And so you're proposing, the dimensional variance so that there's a 15-foot buffer there on the Westgate side and a 15-foot buffer on the other side. And I was just curious, would there be any advantage from the applicant's point of view or from the zoning administrator's point of view of having the 20-foot buffer on the Westgate side and only a 10-foot buffer on the other? Again, I don't know whether that's practical or desirable, but I'm just curious. It looks like to me you folks decided to split the difference, but
I think part of the reason
yeah.
is the current building, which was built long before I think some of
Yep.
those setbacks were in state. And when you sort of cite that line, that's about on that 15-foot setback line. So
Yep.
in keeping with the snowplow
Yep.
idea,
Yep.
we don't have a jog that we have to deal with this building that's sticking out into that even further. It sort of makes one straight line along there.
Okay.
I think that was the main reason for that, honestly.
And then I would comment, and I believe this was something that you obviously were conscious of, but the barn design here is sort of mimicking that back end of the existing building, isn't it?
A little
Sort
bit,
of
yeah.
Mirroring it with that sloped
Single
roof.
slope, yeah.
That's all.
So what, will there be outside lighting on the barn?
I think we proposed one light just on above the entry door. It won't be on full time. It's simply, in the winter when we need to open that up to get in there, we'll have a switch that you can, or actually it will probably be a motion sensor, which is nice because then it's on for a certain amount of time and then it shuts off by itself.
Downward facing shrouded?
So I have a question. Back to what Brian said about a side yard. Is that something that we can do? Just to define
We've done it.
one
We
of
did.
those as a side instead of a front?
It-
I mean, because that changes the requirement of the building if it's a side yard.
So if you look at the interpretation of dimensional standards, there's one where you have one front yard, there's one where you have two front yards, there's nothing where you have three front yards.
Right.
And it has the effect, once you have three, in this case, of being essentially a regulatory taking, in that it helps out any developable
Right.
envelope. So
This came up in the application at the kitty corner near Williams Street, and I believe we took the position that if they didn't have something in there for three front yards, they must have meant there can't be three front yards.
that would be my interpretation as well.
And so then the requirement, the setback requirement is different.
So then it becomes
Correct.
a side yard.
If it's a side yard, is it 10 feet in that district?
I believe it's 20.
I mean, the other thing is, it sounds weird, but it is logical, like, that is their side yard.
Right. I mean, that's not a through road, it's.
They have no entrance to the
Private road
building
to
on
the-
the west gate. Is that correct? There's
Correct.
no-
Right, there's no egress off
Yeah.
in Westgate.
It's
Yeah.
just because the definition of a front yard is the one that the street is on, that's
And that's a
source of the
street, but
problem.
it's also a private, I mean,
So wait,
Doesn't-
is the address for the building a Westgate address?
no.
No,
No.
Marlboro
Again,
Road.
why does this, what we would perceive as a side
20
yard
feet.
be?
It's 20 feet there? in
It's a
that district?
definition that's
And
designed
is
for
it-
clarity
is-
of
Does it get cut in
interpretation
half
that
when
sometimes
it's a
doesn't
secondary
work.
building? Like it does in some of the other,
Don't think so.
is it 20 feet for front yard or 20 feet for side yard?
It's 20 feet for side, but that's a waivable standard, so.
Right. But it doesn't get, the requirement isn't different if it's an outbuilding.
I mean, they would need to waive no matter what,
Yeah, basically.
no matter how we designate it, I think.
Yeah. We went through it a number of different ways to see if we could find an administrative pathway, and we couldn't,
There was
so.
none. Okay.
Maybe
But
you
we
go-
still need to determine whether that's a side yard or a front yard. Would that-
You have to at least state how you classify it when you make your decision.
Okay.
And we need to say why we're doing what we're doing.
Also, in this picture, you have 30 feet in the front of the building. Is that changing to 24?
Sorry, say it again?
You have 30 feet, you have 24 and then 6 feet for the covered storage or the open storage.
Oh, along the sort of,
Right, along the westgate
I guess
side.
that would be the,
The
Or is it 24
Shed.
overall and you have 6 feet for the shed?
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Which is not on the Westgate side.
Yeah, it's on the, that shed is
In between
actually,
the two
is
buildings.
sort of on the face that would be facing the back
I
of our
see.
existing building,
Okay, I see.
Oh.
which would be the north side, so to, yeah.
I get it.
So we read the building as a 24-foot square.
Right.
With
With the
open
overhang on
covered
one side.
storage,
Yeah,
6 feet, and that would be on the back.
yeah,
back end of the
facing north in between the two buildings.
Right.
Okay.
Brian, there's a note in here, existing lighting need upgrade to meet code. What does that refer to?
I wasn't sure if it in fact does
Oh,
need
yes, I
updating
see.
to meet the code.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what they have for existing lighting, so I don't know if it conforms.
Oh, is your existing lighting conforming? Is it downward casted? I'm just talking about outdoor. We
Yeah.
can't regulate
Yeah.
your indoors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can
And
I
it doesn't
put in
stay
my-
on all night?
No.
Can I put in my plug on color temperature? It may not be required, but I would highly recommend any property owner to look into getting perhaps a 2700K. It's a color temperature. It's much like the tungsten of old. I tend to think that any of the lights up in the more, even from 3,000, 5,000, tends to be a cold blue. So again, it's just.
You always give this advice, but you never direct people where to get this for a reasonable price.
We're pretty good at that kind of stuff, so we'll figure it out.
They're
Yeah.
builders.
Yeah.
They're always looking through what's available on the
Yeah.
market. I just
Alright.
want to educate people that the 2700 color temperature does mimic the old tungsten lights of old. It is a warmer color.
Yeah.
And I recommend it because, again, if you're thinking of your neighbors, small things like that.
Oh, I wholeheartedly
I mean,
agree
in
with
fact, there is no neighbor that's gonna see that light.
people
There's
driving.
There's storage sheds.
That's
Light
true.
People
Yeah.
driving up your driveway accidentally.
if they pull down the side of that building and park
Yeah.
in front of there,
Right.
then they will, yes.
Right.
Perhaps it's for your own well-being.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have further questions for the applicant? I'm going to note that there are no members of the public here tonight, so that's why I'm not asking for public comment. I'm going to make a motion to approve the application with a couple of things. One of them is an electric service to support car charging. We didn't really talk about that. It's based on the statute. There's a way to do it pretty minimally. I can't not have it be a condition in this circumstance.
Okay.
Just in case you're wondering why I'm bringing that up suddenly now, it's just...
Well, just today we're talking about, someday they're gonna make an electric truck, so maybe we'll.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically you can satisfy the standard by having a conduit that would accept something
Okay.
were it to be
Can
constructed.
it be a
Brian,
110 outlet?
Yeah, it can be a 110
Yeah,
outlet,
yeah,
or
yeah,
if you
yeah.
have 220 equipment, then
Yeah, yeah,
it could be that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so just an outside outlet.
right.
yeah.
So I'm just giving you a little heads up, but I'd like to entertain a motion to approve application 2019-1 with conditions requiring that it have electrical service to support car charging. That the applicant submit a landscaping plan to the zoning administrator, which he approves. This way you can just do whatever you guys agree on. That any exterior lighting be low voltage LED, downward casting and shrouded. And I move that we find as a matter of law that because there is no provision in the ordinance for a parcel with 3 front yards, we must designate 2 front yards to comply with the ordinances, and that we designate,
Side yards.
no, 2 front yards. And that we designate the 2 front yards as what I'm gonna call the Putney Road side and the driveway side. The Marlboro Road side and the driveway side, which are the northern and eastern sides of the property.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you for your
Great.
patience.
Thank you all.
Have a
you.
nice night.
Appreciate it.
Call Brian with any questions.
Thanks, Brad.
I'd make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 5-0.
Okay.